Hey everybody, welcome. It is Friday, and as you know, we kick off our Fridays with a little live stream here in Inkarnate. Today, we're going to be doing part 6 of our Creating an Epic World with the Fantasy World style. And today we're doing all things forests. That means what kind of forests are there, where do you place them on your map, and how do you reproduce them in the tool. It's like what stamps and tools do you use to create them. So I'm really excited about the stream. Forests are by far my favorite biome. So this should be lots and lots of fun. Hey, first time chatter, Panfuchera, great that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat, by the way, and we're going to be using this guide right here as our kind of a companion guide. When we're working on this, you can find the link for this guide in the chat. So go ahead and clone and edit this. And we're going to be using this guide as a companion guide for the stream. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to start first with the first type of forest that we'll cover, which is going to be your boreal. Okay, now boreal forests are generally in the higher latitudes. So they're going to be two types. There's going to be an open canopy and there's going to be a closed canopy. Open canopy because it is cold, the soil is not rich, not very rich soil, and so plants can't grow into this dense canopy, okay? And then you have the second, which is called a closed canopy, which is generally a little lower down in the latitude. So below a boreal open canopy would be a closed canopy. Okay, so then you would literally place a open canopy north, and then right south below it, you could place a closed canopy. That's going to be in your boreal. So let's go ahead and place the boreal forests right now onto the map. So we'll switch back over to the map here. And you can see here, it's up in the northern areas. So up here is where our boreal forests will be. So anywhere up here. Now I do have a climate guide that I created here, which should kind of help me to try to figure out where the climate zones are. It's set to 0. So we'll go ahead and unlock this and we'll turn this on so you can see it. So I've already created this guide here that kind of tells me where each temperate zone is. This guide should help me to try to figure out where I want to place my boreal. So this top dotted line up here is going to be the very top part where it's too frigid, too cold for any vegetation to exist, right? And so a lot of this is going to be what's called permafrost, meaning it's just permanently frozen, right? So permafrost. And what I'll do is that dotted line, no trees whatsoever. And then I'll start where that line is by placing down some trees for the boreal forest. Now I have a general idea where it is, so I'll go ahead and turn it off. I don't want it to get in the way. So I'll just drop the opacity all the way down to 0 again. Just give it a moment to kind of load. And then once it's down to 0, we'll go ahead and lock this so I don't accidentally select it. And we'll start first with making the boreal. So we'll go into the catalog, and there's going to be two types of trees with snow. This is a deciduous tree, and this is a coniferous tree. Boreal forests are generally more or less dominated by coniferous trees, okay? Not deciduous, which require much more rain to survive. So we'll zoom in, and we're going to place down some trees. And now when it comes to what tree size you want, it all depends on the level of scale and believability that you're looking for. So for instance, if you wanted to make it close to scale as possible, the trees would be absolutely tiny, about this small, okay? And if you want, you can exaggerate the size of the trees to make them bigger so you can see them. That's up to you. So when it comes to scale, this is a artistic and both a kind of functional decision that you have to make, whether you want it to be more to scale where the trees are tiny, 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 or if you want to make the trees a little bit bigger so that the forest is more defined, so you can kind of see the stamps aren't too blurry when you're editing. You can always export 8K and above, so you won't have to worry about the blurriness on the export, but on the editing, it might seem too blurry for you. So it's up to you on which approach you want to go. And I'll go with a little bit smaller, so I'll go with about this size. They're just big enough to where they're not too blurry. Now remember, we're making an open boreal forest, open canopy. So you don't have to put a lot of trees down. So what I'll do is I'll just place 1 or 2 here and there. And sometimes you can cluster maybe just 2 or 3 together, but don't do more than 2 or 3. So 2 there, maybe 1 right here, here, and here. So there's the first beginnings of the boreal forest. The other thing you might want to do is you can put some smaller shrub. You can take these small bushes right here, and you can simply, what I do is I'll just scale it up and place it, and then we'll desaturate it so we can give it that kind of snow-like feel to it, and then we'll bring the contrast down so the lines aren't hard. And then what I do is I can just place these little tiny shrubs. You can put them in clusters, just place one or two. Don't make a giant, remember it's open canopy, so don't place too many. Okay, so now you have these little tiny little pieces here. And so this is your open canopy. And we can also throw in other coniferous trees as well. There's this one, but if you have other trees that you like, as long as they're coniferous, you can throw them in. So for instance, there's this one right here, which is a little bit different. They have a pine. So we can maybe scale these up to be a little bit bigger because they're a pine tree. And so we'll just scatter in just a smattering here and there. And this will give it a sense of diversity too. So it's not all the exact same tree and bush. Again, diversity is important. Okay, now that the boreal forest part, or the open canopy, is done, we can move into a transition between the open and the closed canopy. Okay, so here's our closed canopy right here, as you can see. And the branches are, the trees are closer together, clustered, and creating a canopy. So that's good, and it's because they're a little further south, a little further down in latitude, which means that there's going to be a little bit more richer soil, allowing for trees to cluster and grow together. So let's go ahead and create that. And what I do for the transition is I'll create, my tree clusters will get bigger as I'm transitioning to the close. So what I'll do is I'll place down more, like let's put a bigger cluster here, and then another cluster over here. And the clusters get bigger and bigger the further south you go until you start getting some big clusters. Now, once you start getting to the closed and you feel like, well, this is going to take forever with so many trees, that's okay. There's a way that you can resolve that by using a technique with the shape tool. So let's just place down our more denser area of forest first. We'll place them in here. There we go, makes it a little bit denser, and don't forget to add in those bushes as well. You can see that it's a little blurry because we're editing in the highest resolution 4K, but when you go to export at 8K, 16K, whatever it is you're exporting, you won't have to worry about that blurriness. Just know that this is just the cost that it takes when you are editing, when you are making scale this small. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, one thing that I don't want to do is that I don't want to place down 1,000,000 trees, because what can happen is that as the object list begins to grow, it begins to demand more resources from your machine. And so one way to avoid that is to use the shape tool to create the more denser forest. So now that I've created the transition part from open boreal, I can do the closed part. And what I'll do is I'll go to the shape tool, and there's already the stroke is what's called vine. And you'll find that in fantasy battle maps. So if you go to fantasy battle maps, let this load for a moment, and you're going to catch called vine. So select vine. And then when you go to do the fill, make sure it's set to a texture, and then open the catalog and just type in bushes. Now, because these stamps, the stroke and the texture is set to the scale of fantasy battle maps, you'll have to scale it down because you're at a fantasy world scale. So what I'll generally do is I'll just create a forest. Doesn't matter, don't worry about the scale right now. I'll just create it and use the free draw to create the shape plus. And you're going to see that the scale is way off, right? So there's a couple things we need to do. One, we're going to turn off the shadow, no shadow. And then we're going to bring the scale down. And it's generally going to be around in between 5 and 10. That's usually where it's at. And we're going to bring this scale down as well. There we go. And we're starting to get the kind of scale that we want. And what I'll also do is I'll rotate this a little bit that way. There we go. And then I want it to be a snow, so I'll bring the saturation all the way to 0, and I'll bring the brightness up to get that white color contrast to kind of break it up. Same thing with the fill. Desaturate, bring the brightness up, bring the contrast down a little bit. There we go. And now we have our forest. And I'm going to add this to my favorites. Whenever you use a shape or a line that you're going to end up using a lot of, make sure that you save by favoriting it. And there's this little flag right here. You just add to your favorites and you can switch between recently used and favorites. Now that I've done that, now I can go in and actually draw some boreal forest closed. And from what I understand, the closed boreal forests can be rather large. They can cover huge swaths of permafrost. They're kind of important. Okay, so let's go ahead and place that down. So I'll go over here and I'm going to use my pen again, make sure that I have the right shape. And I'm just going to fill in just this region right here. Okay, and then I'll just go plus like that. Oh, it needs to be, it's at layer -5. I need to bring it up a layer. There we go. The scale seems a little off still, and so does the color now that I've placed it. So we'll bring the brightness up even more. We'll bring the scale down even more. It's a little too big. And then we'll also bring the brightness up on here. There we go. Bring that nice up. And then I might also want to consider bringing the fill texture scale down just a little bit more. There we go. Okay, and now you have a nice closed boreal forest there. And then what I will do after adding that part is don't forget to put a couple stragglers at the edge of the forest, at the tree, where the tree line is. And that way you have some transition between the large canopy and then the forest around it. And then you can just put little tiny little bushes. Don't forget to add little bushes just along the edge here. Wherever you have the big trees, put some bushes in there as well to kind of break it up. Remember, there's a lot of diversity in size and in species, so throwing in multiple variations is a great way to make it more believability. So now we've done a open canopy boreal forest and a closed boreal. Remember that trick of using the vines and the bushes, because this is so much more helpful, because otherwise you'd have to fill that entire space with individual trees. And again, that is taxing on your device. And what's really cool is that you can use the same technique for other types of forests as well, not just boreal. You can use it with this green variation right here to make it, you know, a different type of forest, or you can use this, right? So it's important to use that little technique to save your machine a little bit of memory. Okay, 177 changes. It only took about 10 minutes to make that forest. Not bad, right? So let's save it, and then we'll move on to the next step. While that's saving, we can move into the temperate region, okay, where there's going to be 3 types. Your deciduous, and generally this is going to be a little bit colder, and therefore there's going to be not as dense of a canopy, so there should be openings in the canopy. So you're going to create big forest clusters with little tiny trees and bushes, and then make sure there's negative space, which I'm calling negative space. That open space that you see right here where the light brown is, that is called negative space. Okay, so these deciduous forests and temperate forests are generally going to be a little bit more sparse, and they're not going to have, you're not going to have to use the line tool technique. You can just use individual trees depending on how big it is, right? So that's going to be your deciduous forest, and you can find these in a lot of different places. You can find them at the base of mountains, in which they're called montane forests. You can find them along rivers, in which they're called riparian or riparian forests, which they're by rivers. And they can be in valleys. They can be in a lot of different places, okay? Next is going to be our coniferous forests. And as you guessed, unlike deciduous, which is habited mostly by deciduous trees, the coniferous forests are going to be mostly dominated by coniferous trees. Okay? And again, they're still not super dense. There's still a little bit of space in between. And remember, the soil is a little bit richer now because you're not as far north or higher up in latitude. So you can start putting in those richer browns and reds to paint underneath to represent that nice, rich soil. Okay. And one thing about the coniferous forests is don't use the same type of coniferous tree. Use multiple, like I've done here. Same thing with deciduous. Make multiple. When it's all the same type of tree stamp, it becomes monotonous, and then it loses its biodiversity that you would expect, right? The last one in a temperate is called a temperate rainforests. And these ones are generally very dense because there's a lot of rain. They can generally, you find a lot of them on what's called the wayward side of mountains. The wayward side of a mountain is the rain side, because, and they call it the wind side, or you can call it the windward side, because the predominant or the dominant winds blow on that side. And generally on the other side, you would have what's called a rain shadow. Not every single mountain range needs to have a rain shadow and a windward side, but on the other side, where you have the rain shadow, you would put like forests and stuff. Okay, so now we know a little bit about the deciduous, the coniferous, and temperate rainforests. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is, again, just to verify this, temperate rainforests, again, a lot of them are at the base of mountains, because at the base of mountains on the windward side, they just get a lot of rain. Okay, and they also, valleys are another great location for temperate rainforest, because a valley is in between two mountain ranges, and then what happens is that it traps moisture, allowing for lots of rain, and therefore a temperate rainforest is perfect for valleys. And you can, again, you can put them next to lakes. They can be riparian, they can be montane, whichever one you want. So let's go switch over. Now that we've saved that, perfect, we can go move over to the next one. Again, we're doing a temperate. So we'll go down to the more temperate areas over here. Let's start over here in this green area. And we're starting with our deciduous first. And what I'll do is I'll put this deciduous forest along this lake right here and along this river. So it's going to be a mix of a riparian, montane, and then some wetland along this lake, these lakes and this river here. So let's go in. Remember, it's deciduous. So we need to go back to Fantasy World. And there's a couple deciduous trees we have here. These are coniferous. Let's see here. Let's use these ones right here. You've got common green trees, common beige trees, light green. Let's use a series of these ones, as well as, let's see here. We could also use this one right here, beige. That might work good. We could save that actually for another forest. Let's start with these common green trees here. I've set to 20. And I'm just going to place them in clusters. Remember, whenever you're trying to make a forest with individual trees, you start with giant clusters first. This is so that you can take up more room. Put those clusters in there. There we go. I'll put some along this lake, and then this riparian along there. And then along here. Remember, wherever there's water, that's generally where you find a lot of forests, right? Because trees require lots of water. So a good place to have them. All right, let's go ahead and add in another one, and let's actually take this same tree, and for contrast, let's make it a little bit darker. And then now that it's darker, when I place this down, it should stick out. So cool trick, you don't have to use several different trees. You can change the brightness and the hue of trees. And what this darker color will do is it will contrast against the lighter trees, making the forest more interesting, right? Okay. Now let's go ahead and add in some bushes, of course. We'll type in bush, and we'll use the green ones. And I'm just going to place them here and there around the edges. Remember, you want to leave some open spaces. Okay. And to show that there's richer ground, we're going to use a brown texture to represent the texture underneath. So we'll go with FG here. Give it a second to load. And then I'll go ahead and place some brown in here. Let's do the whole area with a light brown first. And then I'll go in with a darker brown, which I'm going to put directly under the trees. Or you can use shadows, but I don't want to use shadows because it's going to take up some memory. So I'll take the darker shadow or the darker texture, and just right underneath the trees, I'll put this brown color. Now, the reason why I do this brown color is because and this is a deciduous, is that all those leaves are going to fall down. One thing that defines temperate forests is that they go through seasons. Unlike a boreal forest where there's permafrost, it's constantly cold. There is not a seasonal cycle. And so trees lose their leaves in the autumn or in the fall and in the winter. And so that dark brown represents what's called duff. Duff is basically all the falling of the leaves and bark that falls on the ground and then kind of turns into this nutrient. it ends up burning, and then it becomes these nutrient rich soil. And so putting that brown underneath of it will, one, cause the trees to pop out because they're a little bit brighter, so using contrast, but it also is going to represent dirt, that rich mineral soil, right? All that kind of stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and then we'll kind of move on to the next one. So good place to put one right there, the forest. Let's make a coniferous forest, okay? And for the coniferous forest, we're going to put this one right up alongside a mountain. And you find a lot of coniferous forests up alongside the mountains. They're not necessarily going to be up on the mountains themselves. That's called a cloud forest right here. But we will put them at the base of the mountains. Again, they can go anywhere. Riparian, they could be a montane, they could be in the valleys, wherever it might be. It's up to you to decide. But they need to be in a temperate zone. Okay, saved. Let's go ahead and move that. So what you can do is we can put a, let's put it right next to this one, and then we'll put another one right over here. So let's go over here. We're doing deciduous, or I'm sorry, coniferous now. I think I should be able to type in conifer. There we go. And we have all the conifer options here. Let's take some green ones here. 20. I'm going to make them just a little bit bigger so you can see them. And what I'll do is I'll just place a ton all along the mountain here. All along this mountain here. Perfect. Okay. There we go. All along this mountain. And we'll put all along this edge here. And then again, we'll add a riparian element by putting it right along the river here. There we go. Looks good. And then we want to give it some diversity. So let's go in and throw in some other types of trees as well. Let's put some taller ones. So right here you have some evergreen trees. Those are perfect. So let's bring that down to 20. They're a little tall. I don't want them to be massive. And just place them. Well, actually, I think a little bit bigger might be okay. You can kind of see them better. There we go. And we're just going to place them all along in here. And that should give it some darker feel to it, which is nice. There we go. And then we'll go in the catalog and we'll choose a brown texture. Let's use this one right. Let's see here. Let's go with grass 4. That's a good one. And I'm just going to place that. Remember, the drier grass, the drier brown color is going to be in your negative spaces, while the darker brown is going to be underneath the trees themselves. There we go. Okay. Kind of getting it together. There we go. Nice. Cool. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll also make one right here as well. And then I'll make it dominant this tree, and then we'll change it up as well. Multiple types of trees. There we go. Let's go ahead and put in this one. There we go. Oops, we'll bring it down a layer as well. Not a layer, but there we go. Add in a couple of these trees. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then let's go ahead and take let's take this same one and let's bring the brightness down on it so it's nice and dark. And I'm going to place it right here so you can kind of see them nice and dark. Trees, again, to give it that contrast, right? You want some little bit of contrast there. And then finally, we'll add in some bushes as well. Oops, that's set to 30, my mistake. There we go. Cool. And we'll place them alongside the river as well. Okay. So not complex. Again, the real big trick to these kind of temperate forests is to give them biodiversity. If it's coniferous, then make sure that you use different types of conifers. If it's deciduous, use different types of deciduous trees, or change the hue and the brightness to give it that illusion. So kind of nice to add those in. Let's go ahead and quickly save it. We've just finished deciduous and coniferous. The next one is going to be a temperate rainforest, and we're going to use that shape technique again this time with the shape tool, because temperate rainforests can be rather large. And so instead of placing down 2,000 or 10,000 trees, we'll use the shape tool to put that together. Remember, temperate rainforests can be montane, They can be riparian. They can also be in valleys. They can be along lakes. So a lot of different ones. Again, the best place that I find them to be is in a valley because, again, they're in between two mountain ranges. And so, again, moisture gets trapped in between in the valley, creating lots of precipitation. So it's a great location to add it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to take this same one right here, but this time what I'll do is I'll change the saturation back to the colors that I want them to be. Now, one thing you might have to do is change some of the settings for this, and that's okay. So we'll get to that in a second. Let me just fix all the settings here. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and place down one just to see what it looks like. There we go. Okay. And then we'll do some editing. So let's change the stroke scale down a little bit. Ooh, it blurred right there. Okay, there we go. Good. What about there? Looks good. I think about that size looks okay. Let me see how it interacts with the mountains. Okay, looks good. Okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and start making some of these forests, okay? So I'm going to put a lot of them in this valley right here. So I'll have them all along here. We'll place a big cluster right here like that. Press enter. There's a big one. And then we'll put another one right. Big cluster right here. Another one. And then we'll place another one right here. Real big one. Going all along this river. Kind of creating an interesting shape. There we go. Let's create one more right here. There we go. Okay. Now, those are a little bright. So what you can do is we can make them a little bit darker. So what we can do is just bring the brightness down a little bit to make them a little bit darker. And we can always change the hue at any time. So if you want to change it to this more deeper green color, you can. Just make sure that you need to change the hue of the stroke as well. And so you now have this nice darker green. There are a couple tricks that you can do as well. If you want to show the front face of it, it's a nice little trick. You can take the line tool and then choose that vine at the same size and then bring the brightness way down so it's nice and dark. And then just take the free draw and then just place it right along the ledge right here, only on the front face. And you'll have this darker edge right here. And of course, if it's too dark, you can change it up. You can change the scale if you want it to be a little bit smaller. You can change the brightness if you want it to be not quite as bright. But this is a great way to show the front face of it. So if you want to show the front faces, and that way it's more isometric instead of top down, you can. So wherever you see a front face, place that darker face for here. So put one here, all along here. There you go. Now you can see that nice isometric, more shape to it. Other things that you can do is what happens is the texture is repetitive in the center. So one thing you can do to fix up that repetition is throwing in a light source. I have found that if you want to show that parts of the forest canopy are higher up than others, putting down a light source is a great way to do that. So I can go ahead and just put just a couple light sources here and there to kind of represent the higher parts of the canopy. There we go. Perfect. Just to show some elevation. And that way it's not all the same. And so now you have some light sources there. And of course, we can always take these light sources and we'll grab them all. And we can bring the opacity down so it's not too bright. There you go. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing that you can do is you can put some trees inside of it too, if you want to. So if you want, you can take one of these deciduous trees right here and just place it right on top, just like that. So that way you have some trees kind of popping out. And what I would do is I would change it to where it's a little bit more of that browner color, or you can use a darker color like this so it pops out. So one thing you can do is you can throw in little clusters of trees as well here and there if you want. Up to you. If you want to break it up, you can totally do that and have them overlap the back part. So some tricks that you can do when making it. The other trick that you can do is that you can take a line of trees and just place it in the front like this. Another trick that you can do. Just make sure that that hue is the right color, right? So we'll find that hue, bring the saturation up, bring the contrast, and then bring the brightness down a little bit. And so you can also do it that way as well. So a lot of different ways that you can kind of go about doing it. Just make sure that if you do add that little line, just make sure that you break up, because it looks like a line of trees and it looks a little weird. And so to fix that weird breaking up line, just put clusters and single trees along the edges there to break that up. The other thing you can do is you can also put trees behind it as well if you want to have some trees behind it. So I can take this and just put some trees behind as well. That will represent that the trees are behind it, right? So just another little trick that you can kind of do to make your forests more interesting. So lots of cool little tricks that you can do. This is going to be, the stroke is going to be called Vine, Fantasy Battle Maps, and the fill is a texture called Bushes. Remember, they're Fantasy Battle Map textures, so they'll have to be scaled down, and I mean way down, okay? By the way, welcome first-time chatters, both of you, Scarlet Golem and Sabertooth Brother. I'm glad that both of you are here. So cool little tricks that you can do to kind of create that forest. I spent a lot of time on that one, so let's save it. And we'll move on to the next one, which is going to be your rainforest, which is in more of your tropical area, right? So rainforests are, as you guess, incredibly dense. They have the most exposure to sunlight because they're in a tropical region. They're going to be highly dense. There's going to be a lot of trees, and the soil is going to be very rich. So use a darker brown or reddish colors, iron, those reddish colors. And these rainforests can go just about anywhere. Great places to put them, of course, are on the windward side of a mountain. So, because that's where they get a lot of rain, right? They can also be in valleys, right? Where a lot of rain happens. Rainforests can also be riparian as well as on lakes. They can also be montane. So a lot of different places that a rainforest can go. Just make sure that it's within your tropical region, okay? So not too hard to do that. Let's do that next one. Hey, Void Point, glad that you're here. Next is a moist forest. Now, a moist forest is generally not as dense as other forests, and they're generally they don't get rain all year round. They get rain sparse, so they're in a wetland. So you can have them next to rivers, lakes. So those were moist forests. They're mostly deciduous, but you can put conifers in there. I think they're mostly dominated by deciduous, but you can add coniferous. That's up to you, okay? Just remember to throw in some brown dirt color to represent somewhat rich soil, because where there's water, a lot of moisture, the soil is going to be somewhat rich. And so make sure you do that. And then one other thing that you can do is that you can add a cloud to represent fog. Wherever there's moisture, there's fog, right? And make sure to add a little bit of water in the negative spaces where there's no trees, just to show that it's a wetland or that there's water on the ground, okay? So moist forest, very helpful. The next is a dry forest. Dry forests are a little bit drier. They don't have consistent rain with the seasons, and so they get less water. So they're a little bit drier. One thing that you can do to represent that is to have the trees be more brown than green, to show that there's just not as, they're not evergreen, they're not as much water. So you can use brownish tones to represent the trees. They're not as dense as well. You can see there's a lot of open space, what's called glade or open space. And then another thing about dry forests is that dry forests are great to put as transition forests between your temperate forests, your other forests, and your deserts, right? So it's a great transition forest between the north or south side of a desert, and then you can put that dry forest, and then it can transition to another type of forest, like a moist forest or a rainforest or a deciduous or coniferous, okay? So these dry forests are excellent for transitions, and we'll be sure to do that. The next one is called a cloud forest. These are generally higher up in elevation, okay? They're up on the mountains, all right? So they're montane, okay? And generally, depending on the scale of your mountains, you're going to either use a texture or the shape tool, or you're going to use trees to decorate that mountain, okay? And generally, they're going to be on the windward side. I put some on this other side over here. and that's okay. Not every single mountain range has a rain shadow. Certain conditions make that happen. So, but for now, we'll just say that cloud forests are higher up. They're in the mountains, and they're generally pretty dense from what I understand. They're fairly dense. Okay, and the last one is going to be mangroves. And mangroves are very unique. They're different. They deal with a lot of brackish water. Brackish means a mix between salt and fresh water. That's what brackish means, okay? And so when you have that brackish water, it's going to be a mix between salt and fresh. And so these mangrove trees are going to have to build a root system and some way of making sure that that salt water doesn't starve to death those poor trees. So they're generally going to be a mix. A mangrove is part land, and then it transitions into brackish water, and then finally into salt water. So brackish water is going to be closest to the mangrove, and then the further out you go, it turns more to salt water. Okay, so now that you know a little bit about those 5 forests, let's go add them. We should get started, all right? Okay, so the first one was rainforests in our tropical region. Okay, and our tropical region is right about here. Right about here in our tropical region. That's perfect. And I'm going to place down a different texture to kind of show that it's a tropical region by placing down kind of a brighter green texture. And I'm going to use the edgy brush. I just want to show that this region is that way. And so whenever you're using the edgy brush, always make sure to bring the opacity way down. That's super important. And I'm just going to single click, place some lighter green in here because I want to show that this is kind of a rainforest. So lots of green in here. So I'm going to place that in here. And I'll also place some here as well. Remember, these are not in the temperate. They're in your tropical. So they need to be closer to the equator, all right? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and create that rainforest. And remember, they're very dense. They're very big. So what I'll do is I'll use the shape tool again to create the forest. But this time, I'm going to make him, I'm going to use a different, make him a little bit brighter. So I'll bring up the brightness. And I might even change the hue to where there's a little bit more of a, kind of a greenish blue. And then the same thing with the vines. I'll give it a different color. And that way it doesn't mimic perfectly the other forest. So you can see the difference between this forest and this one. There's a lighter green color. It's not quite as dark. And so this is what we're going to use for this. And as always, you favorite it right away. You favorite it. There we go. And I might want to end up... Oh, and I forgot to change the brightness also of the vine. There we go. Okay, perfect. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and put in our very dense rainforests. I'm just going to place it all along this little shelf right here, all along here, nice and big. There we go. Enter. Okay, yeah, nice and big. Let's add another cluster right here, nice and big. Nice. We'll add another one over here. And then we'll add one more right here. We'll make it a little bit smaller. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to also make variations of these large canopies. So I can go in and make a smaller one right here. And what this does, creating variation in sizes, is going to give it more diversity and more believability. So always be sure to throw in, excuse me, just a few smaller variations in there. Just some smaller variations just to give it some more realistic feel to it. So right there's a good spot. Another spot right here. This is a good one. Small little spot. Put one right here. This looks good. Okay. All right, there we go. And now we have those kind of trees there. In fact, I might even change up. I might change these up a little bit. What I can do is I can select one and select all from the style. And I'm going to go ahead and change up the hue just a little bit. Let's see here. I think right about, yeah, about there looks good. Okay. And I might follow that cool little technique of using the darker one to kind of show the depth like I showed before. So I can just place this all along here. And I did change up. So I'm going to have to bring the brightness up a little bit. There we go. And then I need to change the hue as well. So we'll have to fix that U. There we go. Nice. Okay. And then I can go in and then place them. Remember, only on the front face. The face is facing you. Do not put them on the back. So we'll place them here. Let's put one right here. One right here. There we go. It looks like here. Here. That looks good. All along here. There we go. Looking good. Sweet. Oops. Let's undo that. There we go. There we go. Okay. So now you kind of... Oh, I missed a couple spots, actually. This one and this one as well. There we go. Cool. Okay. So now we have some rainforest there. And again, you can always throw in variations of trees as well. So if you want, you can go in to the catalog and you can go into here, type in tree, and then you can throw in a series of different trees. Like this is a tall jungle tree. You can go in and you can place them. Oopsie, let's go up a layer, my mistake. And I'll make sure that it's at the right color as well. Let's see here. Kind of hard to see. Change the hue, bring the brightness up a little bit. There we go. And we'll bring it up to 34. That should be about the right size. And then I'll just go ahead and place a couple of these in here as well. And what this will do is it will just represent like some sections of the jungle or the rainforest that are much taller, where the trees are much bigger. So we'll represent those variations. What I like to do is sometimes put these taller trees in the what's called the interior of the forest. So in more towards the center of the forest, I'll have some tall clusters in the center. Now, it doesn't mean you have to always put them there. I just think it looks good when you throw in these kind of bigger chunks in the interior. That way you kind of have some height variation in your forest, right? Put some there, put one there. Okay, let's take a step back and look at it. There we go. So you got some variation. If you don't like the way it looks, if it's not the right kind of green, you can always just select all from the stamp and just change the hue up if you want it to be the right color. You can always find that green that you're looking for. Bring that brightness up. Change up the hue to be the green you're looking for. Let's see. You can change whatever color you want it to be. It's up to you. So you can play around with it. Have fun, right? Okay. And then one thing I can also do is to throw in maybe some darker trees. I think there's some palm trees right here. We could use these as well. Let's make these a little bit darker. And then we'll place... Oopsie, it's a little too dark. My mistake. Oop, that is not the right color. Let's bring them up here. Those are a little dark. Let's bring the brightness all the way up. Change the hue a little bit. Bring the brightness up. There we go. Cool. Whenever you need to edit something and you can't see it, just scale it up. That's just the trick, right? There we go. There. Put one right here. One over here. And I think I'll put some in this valley too. I'll put it where there's not the mountain, so the shadow of the mountain is there. So right about there looks good. And then we'll put one there and then one right there. Okay, there we go. Looking good so far. Looks like I'm going to cut out a little bit. We'll quickly save here. Did I lose everybody? I hope not. Ooh, my bit rate's going down. Ooh, that's not good. I probably lost a few people. Okay, we'll hit the save. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I saw some glitches there. Sorry about that. It looks like my bit rate went way down, so it's just having a hard time. Cool, it's working now. Great. Sorry about that, everybody. Just some connection issues there. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay. All right. We got map saved. And where are we at for time? 15 minutes. We can probably squeeze them all in here. Let's make that moist forest. You guys just keep me posted if I cut out, and that way I can stop and then get it going again. So let's move on to moist forests. Remember, these are not as dense. They are going to be mostly deciduous. You can throw in conifers. I would just have them a little more sparse. Okay. Hey, first-time chatter, Slaw, the CPA. By the way, glad that you're here. I'm glad that it's working now. Thank goodness. I was getting a little nervous there. Okay, so moist forests. Let's go ahead and do that. And remember, they're in the tropic. So let's go ahead and let me take a look at it here. Let's put one. Let me take a look here. Let's put one over here. This looks good. And I'm going to place it right next to the forest, or right next to this river right here. Okay. All right. Yeah, sorry about that. That was odd. Yeah, it looks like the bit rate went out and the internet went down, so I'm sorry about that, everybody. That's not good. My mistake. Okay, well, not my mistake, the internet. All right, let's go make that moist forest, and we're gonna make it riparian. All right. Yep, you're right. It's not my fault. So let's go jump in. Let's go ahead and pick our trees. Let's go with our common green trees. Remember, mostly deciduous, so don't use a whole lot of conifers. And we're going to place a lot of it next to the river. Remember, it's riparian, so we'll go ahead and again we're going to have clusters. Remember, it's not going to be a very large canopy, so you probably don't have to use the shape tool for this one. And just don't forget to throw in a couple just a couple rando single trees here and there. Don't forget to do that. And then of course some random single bushes as well. And I'll make the bushes a little bit darker. That way they'll pop out more. And I'll just kind of place some darker. Here we go. That way you get that contrast going. That way it's not all the same kind of green. There we go. Looks good. All right. That looks good. And then I'll take that darker kind of brown and just put it under the clusters. There we go. Some darker brown. All right. And then we'll take that lighter brown and put it in the negative spaces. Okay, looking good. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Now let's add in a little bit of water. And I recommend using a brush, circle brush, soft brush works good. 100% opacity works fine, and we'll bring the size up to about 2. And then just put little single dot little areas where you have a little bit of water. And it's not a bad idea to put it next to the river, as you would kind of expect. There we go. And you have a little bit of a... And then the other thing that you can do is remember, because it's it's that kind of a forest, it's kind of a moist forest, you can type in cloud and just place it to where it fits over the whole forest. And then simply bring the opacity down. Oopsie, I just kind of noticed that these trees right here are all at layer, all of these are at layer +5, which is not good. So we'll bring that down. There we go. And then I'll take this mist, bring the opacity down, and then just put that right over top of it like that. There you go. And now you have a moist forest. So I'll save it and we'll move on to the next one. Things are looking good. Sorry about the interruptions there. Looks like I lost a few people. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, instant fog. Boom. Just one little cloud. Boom. Done. And that's it. So again, super easy forest to make. Thankfully, they're not super dense, so you don't have to use that shape tool technique. You can just use individual trees. The next one is called dry forests. Okay, and again, these are great transitional forests. They're great for transitioning to other biomes, whether it's another type of forest, or maybe you want to make a plain or going into a mountain range, whatever it might be. They're not always transitional, but I generally use them as transitional forests because they are drier, they're not as dense, and they work well next to an arid area like a desert. So we have a couple deserts here. We have one desert right here. So a great place to put them would be like right here or north up here. Another forest right here could be right over here. Right above here is where a dry forest could be. It's usually north or south of a desert of some kind. Now this one right here is technically a cold desert. And you notice that the cold desert, because it's much darker, the water is much cooler, much colder. That's why I put that dark blue in there to represent it's a cold desert. I don't know about the physics on that one. I think you probably could put a desert, some kind of dry forest above there, but we'll put it over here for now. We'll start there. So again, dry forests. And we're going to use brownish trees, orangish color trees, these kind of color trees, beige. These can be a mix between, I think the majority of these are deciduous. I do not think the majority of them are coniferous, though they probably can have some. Okay, we'll go ahead and make sure that the scale is correct, and we're just going to throw down. Remember, they're not dense, so you just need to create little. You need to create little clusters of them first. So create little clusters. Cluster here, cluster there. You're seeing a lot of the techniques that I use making are the same, right? I use the larger clusters first. And the closer you get to the desert, the less tree growth you have. So put tiny little individual trees the closer you get to the desert. And then the further away you get from the desert, you can have slightly larger clusters. And then don't forget to go in. Remember that cool little trick? You can go in and bring the brightness down. Because these trees are much lighter, we can put in a darker variation. There we go. And that will create some variety. There we go. Cool. Some dark variations here. Just remember, you don't want to create a super dense forest. And then just here and there, randos. Here and there. There we go. Now we have some randos. And then again, we'll also take maybe this bush right here will work out great. Let's take the size down and just place them rando. There you go. Okay. All right. There is your dry forest. You can also use a darker. Okay. Oh, the project right now, we're covering forests for the fantasy world style. We've covered a lot already. As you can see, we're right now on dry forest, and then we're going to move on to the last two, cloud forests and mangroves. For those of you who missed it, you can totally find this guide. The link is at the top of the chat. So go ahead and clone and edit this if you need this guide. I made it to make it super easy to use. If you're confused on the green and gray part at the bottom part, those are temperate and boreal. So the same, it's really just a mirror from the top, just reverse it. So if you're kind of curious why there's nothing down there, that's the reason why. So we've covered all the way up to dry forest. So we're moving on to cloud forest in just a moment. First, we'll go ahead and use some texture underneath here to kind of represent the part of the forest that's open, the part that's the canopy that's open. We'll bring the opacity down. Oh yeah, I could do that. Absolutely. That's a good idea. Let me see if I can pin that. There we go. Okay, that's pinned. There we go. Thank you, by the way. Appreciate you mentioning that. Always thank you, Sir Joe Doe. Okay, now I'm going to take that darker... Oopsie, that's a little too bright, actually. Let's bring the opacity way down. There we go. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to use this... Oh, I see. I'm using... my softness is down, not my opacity. Silly me. I'm doing the wrong one. There we go. All right, so let's just use a lighter color in the negative space. There you go. So that lighter color is in the negative space. So what happens when you stream for a long time, you start to get a little, ooh, I'm using the wrong tools. And then use that darker texture again underneath. So we'll use this darker texture. It's going to go underneath of these. There we go. And again, that darker texture works as contrast, right? It's going to make the trees pop out because the trees are lighter. So cool tricks using contrast. Get that nice brown underneath of this. There we go. Looks good. Same thing here. And then we'll put a little bit of brown underneath some of these individual trees as well. There we go. Okay. And then one thing we can also do is to show that we're moving into a desert, I can take some dead trees. So I can take this tree right here and I'll make it, let's desaturate it, and we'll bring the brightness down a little bit. Actually, we can add a little bit of saturation. Brightness down, and then I'll just put a couple dead trees kind of along the edge here. There we go. Again, that transition. There we go. And I'll even scatter in a couple dead trees in the forest itself. That way there's still transition going on, right? You would expect a couple dead trees because, hey, it's a dry forest, right? It doesn't have annual or seasonal rain. And so sometimes it's going to have a very dry season or a very dry time, and then some trees are going to die. So putting some dead trees in your dry forest is a good idea. Okay. All right. Let's take a step back and look at it. Awesome. Forests are looking good. Let's save it. It's always good to take a step back and look at it. I'm not 100% satisfied with how bright that is. I would probably make this a little bit darker because you have really bright color there. So I'll have to end up changing that. But overall, I'm satisfied with it. So let's go ahead and move over to the next one. We're going to be covering cloud forests. Remember what I mentioned earlier when we're talking about cloud forests is it depends on the scale. If you're making like a regional size area with the fantasy world style, then totally makes sense to use stamps. But if it's a much smaller, the stamps are much smaller, you might want to consider using a shape. Sorry about that. Well, 2 more left. Cloud forest. Let's go. Let's zoom in. Okay. All right. Now, from what I can tell, most of these forests most of these mountains are pretty small. So let's go with tree. Let's go with tree instead of using the other one. So we'll look at it. Again, majority of these cloud forests, a lot of them are conifer heavy, conifer dominant. Doesn't mean that there's not deciduous. What I would do is I would start with deciduous at the base of the mountain and then move into conifer the higher up that you go, but make sure to have a smattering from here and there. Pepper them out here and there, okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll start with this one with deciduous, and we'll start at the base of the mountain like this. So at the base of the mountain, lots of deciduous, and it can be very dense. That's fine. Oopsie, I just realized that I'm set to layer -5. Whenever you're doing it, you want all the stamps to be on, most of your terrain should be on layer 1 or on the same layer so that way they interact correctly. For instance, as I'm placing these trees, see how it's behind it? It's because it's behind the bounding box. But when I go down, it goes in front of it. That doesn't happen when you're on a different layer. So when you're doing your terrain, mountains, forests, make sure it's all on one layer so that the collision boxes will interact correctly with the stamps placing them down on the same layer. Okay, so super important to kind of remember that. Okay, so we'll start with a deciduous trees at the base of the mountains. We'll start with that. And then you'll notice that they don't show on top. So you'll have to go up a layer. So then we go up a layer, and then now we can go on top. Just make sure you don't put them on top of the trees. So place a couple on top there. And then the higher up we go, we move into coniferous. And so we'll grab this one right here, and then we'll start placing some coniferous trees up all along the side of the mountain here. There we go. And again, you can't really see it very well because you can't see it very well because it's so small. But again, when you export at 8K and higher, this won't be blurry at all. So just remember that when you're working at a smaller scale like this, it's just one of the drawbacks that you have to deal with when you're working at such a tiny scale. The stamps are very blurry once you start getting past like the 30 and 40 size or going down below 30 or 40, that begins to happen. Okay. So you can see how that forest works. I would start at the base of the mountain. Remember, it's a montane. Start with deciduous. Then as higher up you go in elevation, switch or transition into using more coniferous trees. So there's that one. Cool. We'll go ahead and save it. And we'll work on the very last one, which is mangroves. All right, sweet. And that means the mangrove, it's going to be alongside a coastline. Okay. Or if there's a lagoon, which means that there's salt water going into where this mountain area is. Okay, so we can do that. Okay, let's take a step back and look at it. There we go, looking good. Now let's go ahead and put in one last one. Here we go. So we'll go ahead and zoom in, and we're going to want to choose a place to put our mangrove. I put a lot of them. Let's see here. I put a lot over on this side. We could probably move one over to here. I think this is a good spot right here. We can put a mangrove right here. And we'll start with using jungle trees first. So either the jungle trees or the tall jungle trees. We'll put the tall ones on land. And what I'll do is, again, we'll start with clusters first. You guys know the routine. Clusters, 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 right? Put your clusters. There you go. And then after you put your clusters, put your single trees in. There we go. And then to add in some diversity, we'll throw in this other tree right here. There we go. We got some diversity. And now we'll start moving our way in towards the ocean part. And so what we'll do is we'll create little clusters. I wouldn't make them massive, but start putting some clusters right along the shore and then right all along the edge of the shore line. Like that. And then just put smaller ones the further out you get, okay? There we go. And then we can go in and then we can, again, use that lighter texture and put that in the negative spaces, whatever texture you want to use. So remember, in the negative space. When I say negative space, I'm talking about where there is no stamps. Okay, there you go. And then you have your nice little mangrove there. And one thing you can do is you can also make the water to show that it's brackish. You can change the color a little bit. So we go to background. I can change it to more of a greenish blue and then just start placing in that greenish blue right here. Okay, there we go. All right, and there is our mangrove. All right, so the techniques are mostly the same, right? You've noticed that you make large clusters and then smaller clusters and then single trees as you branch out further away from the bigger parts. You also notice that when you have huge swaths of forests, you end up using the shape tool. You use the vine stamp and you use the bushes. Texture. Just remember that those stamps and those textures are set to a much larger scale, fantasy battle maps. So you will have to scale them down, all the way down, probably in between 0 and 10 or 1 and 10, because the scale is just so small. It really just depends on what your scale is for your world map. Generally, the scale for world maps are smaller, okay? Again, you can find the guide for these forests at the top. I've pinned it, so go do that. This guide should help you. Again, the guide shows you what kind there are, the subcategories within the main categories, boreal, temperate, and tropical. I've also made an example of each forest within the guide so that way you have an idea on what stamps to use and what textures to use. So you can kind of see here that I've made each one so you know how to do it. There you go. Perfect. All right. Awesome. And we got it done within an hour. We were able to make we were able to make, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We were able to make 10 forests in 1 hour. Okay, so you got a lot done. So this is what happens when you do the research, when you figure out the techniques, and you do take a little bit of time to make it the right way. You can be done quickly. And you'll notice again that one way to avoid that 10 million tree lag that can just really drag on your resources is to use the shape tool. Okay, so remember that technique. All right, so that is it for this stream. Thank you so much. I hope you found this helpful. Again, forests are probably one of the most fun. There's some things that I didn't do, like I didn't show seasons like an autumn forest. I didn't show like a fey forest or a corrupted forest. Those are fantasy, and believe me, they're not hard to make. All you need to do is just change the hue. If you want to create a fey forest, change the hue of the trees to purple, pink, blue, orange, whatever color you want, right? When you want to create a autumn forest or a forest that's in a season of fall, you simply need to use the fall ones or change the color to reds, oranges, and reds. So very simple. All the rules that we put in here apply to making those forests. In fact, when it comes to fantastical forests, you don't have to follow any rules at all, okay? So just remember the trick. You want to create a fantastical element, change the hue. Have the forest be upside down, have them be crooked, facing in different directions. Have all types of different trees. Have a massive world tree in the center. So whenever you want to create a fantastical element, you just have to go outside of the realm of realism. So again, change the color, add massive trees that are way bigger than they would be naturally, right? Those are all the tricks to creating that fantastical element. But this is the basic knowledge that you'll need for making the regular forests. And then to make the more fantastical ones, just add the fantastical elements. The technique remains the same. All right. Thank you again. I blabbed on forever. I will see you all next Wednesday, I believe. I don't remember what the stream is, but it's coming up. It's going to be a master class. I love you guys. You guys are awesome. I will see you all next week. Have a great weekend. Please stay safe and healthy, and merry map making. See you later, everybody. Take care, okay?